The spatial distribution of population is one of the most important topics of human geography. It is significantly important because man has brought tremendous change over the earth's surface. At present, man is the single most important powerful geographical factor transforming the earth's surface at an unparalleled pace. Scientific and technological achievements of man have reached dizzy heights and nothing now seems to be beyond his reach. Man has walked on the surface of the moon. Scientists are at the threshold of achieving superconductivity, which will usher in revolutionary changes in global civilization. Man has tools to change the climatic conditions. Man's scientific advancements have resulted into acid rain, global warming, atmospheric pollution, ozone depletion, nuclear winter and nuclear radiation, and has further threatened to destroy nature's ecosystem across the globe. The study of human population and its spatial patterns are thus of vital importance. On completion of this lesson, you should be able to understand the history and evolution of population, examine the growth of population and understand the distribution of population. In the initial phase of human history and prehistory, the human population grew at a snail's speed. The hazardous climatic conditions, the migratory character of hunters and gatherers and the poor nourishment were all unfavorable for the growth of population. During the last 10,000 years, the growth of world population accelerated at two distinct times. The first time was at about 10,000 years, that is before present, or 8000 BC, when man started the domestication of plants and animals. So, this abrupt change in human activity is also known as agricultural revolution. The assured supplies of food from agriculture and settled settlement life provided better nourishment, and the human body became more resistant to the adverse weather and climate. Consequently, the human population started increasing at a steady pace. The second time when the population increased faster was in 1779, when man harnessed fossil fuels and developed steam engine. This development is known as industrial revolution. Both the above mentioned developments in the human history had profound effects on the spatial distribution of population. These revolutions altered the population patterns and demographic attributes of the world as well. The agricultural and industrial revolutions are important ecologically because population numbers and densities are at the heart of relationship between humans and natural environment. If population numbers rise or fall, everything else is liable to change, including land use, settlement forms, economy patterns and social mobility. Before discussing the present distribution and density of population, it is of great interest to have a brief description of human population prior to the beginning of agriculture. There is no direct or documentary evidence to know the growth pattern and density of population of the world during the prehistoric period. The scholars of population have, however, estimated the population of the past on the basis of circumstantial evidence. For example, agriculture was unknown before about 8000 BC. Prior to that, all human groups made their living by hunting and gathering. Not more than 52 million square kilometers of the earth's total land area of about 150 million square kilometers could have been successfully utilized in this way by our early ancestors. From this and the population densities of hunting and gathering tribes of today, it has been estimated that the total population in 8000 BC was about 5 million people, which was given by Durand in 1973. They lived in bands of fewer than 50 people, the men being primarily hunters, whereas the women providing most of the food through plant gathering. Nowhere on the earth was population large. Typical densities were 4 persons per square kilometers. There were large uninhabited areas and each band usually lived in relative isolation from others. Such low densities are not surprising because the economies of bands were based on a form of extensive land use. In other words, they obtained their food from large areas without expanding much labor per unit area. It was the period of high birth and death rates. The high death rates restricted population growth. It is probable that population growth was also restrained by deliberate control through restricted sexual intercourse, abortion, infanticide and the use of plants with contraceptive powers. Slow growth for a band meant that its size did not rapidly exceed the carrying capacity of the territory being used for hunting and gathering, which was said by D.V. in 1960. The distribution of population prior to the development of agriculture covered only parts of the old continents. By 8000 BC, hunters and gatherers had migrated from Africa throughout Europe and Asia to Australia and across the Bering Strait and southward the length of the America. Only Antarctica was totally uninhabited by mankind. The size of population at various times from the onset of agricultural revolution, that is 8000 BC, until the first scanty census data recorded in the 17th century AD has also been estimated. It is thought that the total human population at the time of Christ was around 200 to 300 million and that it has increased to 500 million by 1650 AD. In 1850, the world's population was estimated to be 1000 million. It means it was doubled from 500 millions in 1650 to 1000 million in 1850. The population doubled again to 2000 million by 1930. In 1975, it rose to 4000 million mark and in 1987 became 5000 million. In 1999, the world population crossed the mark of 6000 million and around 2012, it has been about 7000 million. Projected population of 2025 and 2050 is about 8 billion and about 10 billion respectively. The pattern of human population growth is shown in figure. It may be seen from this size that the size of population has increased continuously and that the rate of increase has also risen stupendously. According to the estimates, the population on the average doubled once every 1500 years during the Neolithic period, or we call it as the New Stone Age. The next doubling from 500 million to 1 billion took 200 years and the doubling from 1 billion to 2 billion took only 80 years. The population reached 4 billion around 1975, having doubled again in only 45 years. If the present growth rate of population continues, it will become 7 billion by 2012 and reached 8 billion in 2025 and about 10 billion by 2050. As described in the preceding paragraph, the population of our ancestors a few million years ago was confined to Africa and numbered only in lakhs. By the time our ancestors invented agriculture, the information started passing from one generation to another. The transmission of knowledge about hunting, gathering and preparation of food and identification of enemies helped in the expansion of agriculture and growth of population. The development of agriculture around 8000 BC resulted in the decline of death rate. It is guessed that the increased food supply led to better nutrition, greater resistance to diseases, increased longevity of life and hence a growth in population. This may be correct, but we have no conclusive proof that death rates fell. They may have even risen shortly after the advent of agriculture. Disease spread more rapidly in the closed packed communities than in small and relatively isolated hunting and gathering bands. It is also possible that Increase in birth rates after the advent of agriculture resulted in some social changes. Rules and sanctions that had been used to keep hunting and gathering bands small and in balance with their resources may have been relaxed in agrarian societies that required more labor to produce food. There are other evidences also which prove that the population after the advent of agriculture increased at a faster pace. Using evidence from living populations of hunters and gatherers such as the Sang and Kung, that is Bushmen of Kalahari Desert, supporters of this view have concluded that our ancestral hunters and gatherers consciously tried to space the births of their children. Child spacing among the nomadic hunters and gatherers was presumably necessitated partly by the inability of the mother to carry more than one child. Another likely reason would have been the need to nurse each child for at least 3 years because the environment lacked the soft food required for earlier weaning. Moreover, it appears likely that prolonged breastfeeding itself may help in suppressing fertility. Infanticide may also have been practiced widely among hunters gatherers when children were born too soon and in time of scarcity. The Polynesians who live in the islands of Pacific Ocean also practiced infanticides, polyandry, non-marriage of landless younger sons, abstention from sexual activity for a period of time after birth of a child, coitus interruption and abortion. It seems from these evidences that hunter gatherers practiced child spacing. When man started agriculture, the imperatives for child spacing disappeared and population started growing at a faster pace. It is generally agreed that agriculture and high natality go hand in hand. The prime reason for this is the perceived economy value of children to farming families. In other words, in agrarian societies, children were commonly viewed as economic. They serve as extra hands on the farm and take care of parents in their old age. The growth of human population was, however, not continuous after agricultural revolution. Civilizations rose, flourished and disintegrated. Periods of good and bad weather occurred and famine and war took their toll. Despite fluctuation in the birth and death rates, agriculture permitted the existence not only of higher population densities and settled village life, but also of large scale cooperative ventures, specialization of labor, development of crafts, mainly pottery making, etc., and social stratification. The growth and development of irrigation and emergence of towns and cities concentrated economic power in the hands of numerically small elite who controlled much of land and food resources. The great mass of society, however, consisted of peasants and laborers who worked the land and produced the food surpluses upon which the entire social structure was built. During the medieval period of human history, there was more emphasis on commerce and trade. This resulted into growth and development of towns and cities and the consequent increase in the demand of consumer goods. It was a period when the land owners wished to put more land to the plough. Gradually, in Europe, agriculture started taking the shape of big business. The life expectancy, the number of years an infant is expected to live, however, remained below 35 years. The doubling time for the world population was around 1000 years. The main characteristic of population of the world prior to the industrial revolution were high infant mortality, short life expectancy, periodic famines and undernourishment, vulnerability to epidemics, high birth and death rates and wide fluctuation of death and responding birth rates. The outcome of these conditions was that although there were sharp periods of population decline, they were followed by short time revival. The result was a slow long term increase in population numbers. The second major turning point in the population growth came with the industrial revolution, and the Industrial Revolution led the systemization of production with the help of power driven machine. This resulted into high output per capita and rapid accumulation of wealth. The distinguishing feature of the Industrial Revolution was that fossil fuels, which we have already discussed, and primarily coal, provided an energy source other than animal muscles, wind or water power. The use of fossil fuels allowed productivity to increase rapidly because human effort was supplemented by powered mechanical devices. The Industrial Revolution in Europe and North America created a new society in which the primary activities, mainly agriculture, forestry, mining, fisheries, began to decline, and the secondary, that is the manufacturing and tertiary services activities, began to take an increasingly important role. The world's population of 7.6 billion in 2017 is expected to reach about 8.6 billion by 2030 and further increase to 9.8 billion by 2050 and to 11.2 billion by 2100. Therefore, the additions of populations are phenomenal during the 21st century, continuing on a trend of population increase which started in the second half of the 20th century. The percentage distribution of population by regions is present in the table 3. About 55% of the total world's population lived in Asia, followed by 21.66% of the world's population that lived in Europe, 9.02% lived in Africa and 6.81% lived in North America, whereas 6.66% lived in Latin America and Caribbean and 0.5% lived in Oceania. By 2100, the Asian population composition is expected to decrease from 55.3% in 1950 to 42.74% in 2100. A similar trend is expected in Europe and North America, but the population composition in Africa is expected to increase from 9.02% in 1950 to 39.94% in 2100. The distribution of population in the world is not uniform. Scholars have divided the world mainly into two regions, sparsely populated and moderately populated regions. So, coming to the sparsely populated regions or the non-ecumen, Clark has observed the 7/10 of the Earth's land which may be classified as negative environments for human occupation comprise the polar and subpolar lands, the high mountains, the hot and humid mid-latitude deserts and parts of the tropical wetlands in Africa and Latin America. All except the first are widespread in the developing countries which have more than their fair share of such physical environments. Among them, Antarctica occupying 12.5 million square kilometers, virtually a non-ecumen where barely a few hundred scientists are living in their research stations. Besides, there are other permanently frozen lands in Canada, Eurasia, Greenland and Iceland where the total population is less than 5 lakhs. If we add the cold high mountain regions, the total area of these frozen lands is nearly 25% of the Earth's area. Next comes deserts, mainly Sahara, Kalahari, the dead heart of Australia, Patagonia, the intermountain deserts of the USA, Arabian Desert, Gobi, Thar, Taklamakan, etc., which claim nearly 20% of the Earth's surface and the virtually empty lands with very sparse populations. Hot and wet tropical lands of Latin America, mainly the Amazonia, Africa, the Congo Basin and the Southeast Asia excepting Singapore and Java are also sparsely populated. In between the densely populated areas and the sparsely populated areas lie transition zone with moderate population. The Mediterranean zone of the Maghreb in Africa, parts of Egypt and Sudan, highland Ethiopia, northern Nigeria, Guinea, coastal areas, coastal Natal and Transvaal are moderately populated regions in the Southwest Asia. There are moderately populated areas in Iraq, Iran, Turkey, Syria and Israel. In Southeast Asia, there are wide moderately settled lands. In India, 50% of the population lives on 1/4 of its area and 1/3 lives on just 6% area, most densely populated. The peninsular India is by large moderately populated. Similar situation prevails in China, where adjoining regions to the cradle land of the North China Plain are moderately populated. The Tarim basin of Xinjiang and the Saidan basin of Qinghai, which have been developed as agricultural regions, have moderate population. In South America, there are moderately settled regions in Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, Mexico, Venezuela and Colombia, etc. In Anglo America, the Mid-East and central parts are moderately populated. In Australia, parts of South Wales and Victoria qualify as moderately settled regions. Population in the context of development studies about human population and how societies develop and change over time. Studying in this area involves learning about the causes of population growth, birth rates, death rates and migration and the consequences of population growth. This area is also studies about the development of human societies, poverty, environmental issues and other global issues.